Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of No More Silos. My name is Dr. Erica Santiago and this is my podcast. Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining me again. We are in a new series of episodes, new topic of the book of Revelation. And we started out talking about the silos of identity that have impacted our lives and our discipleship ways that we disciple others. And then we talked about our embodied faithfulness and really kind of began our conversation there in the book of Revelation. Today, I want to talk about discipleship as a group project. Discipleship as a group project. And last night, just before I went to bed, I remembered that there was a time when I was very into studying eschatology and end times. I think I mentioned on the previous episode that I actually own a copy of the Jack Van Impe Study Bible. And this was back in the 90s, and I was just beginning my career in technology and project management after college, and having been a literature major, which that was a whole thing. I think I've talked about that here on the podcast before on an episode. That was an interesting moment, shift, if you will, because my plan was law school, but that's not how it all worked out. And in the 90s, late 90s, working in IT, we became increasingly aware of an issue called Y2K. And for those of you who've been around a bit, for a while, or around older millennials and Gen X and older, you probably remember Y2K as a time of foreboding panic. This was pre 9/11 times. This was we were fighting aliens in the theater. All of our movies and shows. My favorite was X-Files, but we were watching movies like Men in Black and Armageddon, and everything was focused on the year 2000. Even a computer glitch that was baked in to the system, because I guess the people that set it up originally, it just didn't occur to them that life would continue. And so back then I used to travel a lot for work. And I did that for quite a few years. I traveled a lot. And in the airport one day, I picked up a book called The Last Apocalypse, Europe at the Year 1000 AD by James Reston Jr. So this was 1998, this book came out. So I probably purchased it either late 98, 99, leading up to this whole Y2K. I mean, it was such a big deal that even churches were telling people to prepare. Like the mega church I went to at the time was selling giant drums, these blue plastic drums, I'll never forget, these giant drums for us to collect water in, rainwater. They were telling us to buy peanut butter. When I tell you I bought like a whole bunch of peanut butter and batteries because nobody knew what was going to happen to the computers. And so this might be a walk down memory lane for some of you, and this might be absolutely new information, or maybe you learned about it in school, because here we are 25 years later, and so much other stuff that seems unimaginable has happened. So let me share with you, before I go any further, from the last chapter in this book, starting on page 274 of The Last Apocalypse. The writer says, "In considering the millennium, at least if we are to judge from the experience of the last time the calendar turned 3 digits, people are looking for the apocalypse in the wrong place. It cannot be found in the thunderous arrival of 10,000 angels on a field of blood in some epic final clash between the forces of good and evil. In 1000 AD, when by rights the great battle should have happened, it did not happen, nor can it be found in an atmosphere of terror. No frightened mobs raced through the streets on New Year's Eve 999 AD. There is simply no evidence of it. In their disappointment, a few modern historians have tried to invent the evidence. And I'll pause there for a second because there's this time also, the late 90s, when we had, oh gosh, it was the whole thing with Mary Magdalene. And I actually just bought a book about her. I'll talk about that in a future episode. But that does a deep dive into Mary Magdalene. And I've said here on No More Silos many times that we have been misinformed in large part in the church about Mary Magdalene. But I digress. I pause here because there was not only the Left Behind books going on in the 90s and all that rapture anxiety, but there was also the, oh gosh, what was that movie with Tom Hanks? All right, I'm going to have to pause and go look it up. So it turns out the movie I was thinking of was Da Vinci Code, and it came out in 2006. So not in the 90s, but the books came out in the 90s, and I remember them being on the shelves. And there was another book that I purchased that talked about Mary Magdalene, and it goes into the historical myth, let's call it, of Mary Magdalene and St. James going to Spain, which actually shows up in the Last Apocalypse book. So all of this stuff is like swirling around. The bottom line is all of this stuff is swirling around. This idea of the apocalypse is coming because the year 2000, and it had people pretty freaked out. When I tell you, it was pretty freaked out. And then there were some, not to add fuel to the fire, who said, well, what if the calendar is off? And he actually mentions this a few paragraphs later on page 275 in The Last Apocalypse. He says, perhaps it is the attention in modern times to an exact day or year or hour that is misleading. In an illiterate age, there can be no awareness of the calendar. But even if ignorance were not a factor, what would have been the date to fear? By what measure do we identify this doomsday, the Julian calendar or the Gregorian that followed it? Must we date it from Christ's birth or death? If the latter, we get a reprieve of another 33 years. Since the ancients had no concept of zero, how does that change things? The gift of another year's grace? And then so he goes on and to close out his book. But what he has going on in the book is this. He provides an engaging account of Europe on the brink of the first millennium. And the book delves into the widespread anxieties and beliefs that shaped European societies as they faced the anticipated apocalypse in the year 1000, where religious fervor and millennial fears influenced everything from daily life to governance. And so Reston examines how these apprehensions intermingled with significant cultural and political transformations occurring throughout Europe, ultimately forming a unique moment of historical change. Now, I want to pause here from my notes, where I told y'all I had like pages and pages of notes. The thing that is striking about The Last Apocalypse, and the fact that I've continued to keep it accessible in my home library, is how much of what's in this book made it to Netflix. I just watched a few months ago Valhalla, the story of the Vikings, and it's set in this time. And in fact, I even sent a screenshot, a picture to my husband as I was reading last night of the table of contents and one of the maps that's there, because a lot of the names that he and I are familiar with after watching all these series on Vikings is there. And he thought, and I may have mentioned this in a previous episode, how he thought I would be interested in it because of the religious overtones or undertones of what's going on. But the thing that I didn't think about when I was watching Valhalla was this book that I had sitting on my shelf until yesterday, because I'm talking about Revelation. And this apocalypse that was expected and didn't happen in that time. One of the ways that I took this book at the time is maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't happen. Maybe we're looking for something that God is not ready for. But I had an interesting thought this morning as I was reviewing my notes, and that is this. It's not a matter of the calendar or the apocalypse because we know that the word apocalypse means that it's an unveiling, right? We learned that last time, that the word apocalypse means to uncover or to reveal. The Bible Project has a whole set of notes on apocalyptic literature that's like 35 pages long if you print it. And an apocalypse is when God pulls back the curtain to show the true nature of the world from a divine perspective. And so there's several different apocalypses discussed throughout the Bible, like from the prophet Isaiah's vision of God's throne room or Paul's vision on the road to Damascus. So there's all of this that's going on. But here's the thing that kind of has hit me with what I know about Revelation and what I know, the context that's there. The issue is paganism. And the thing about paganism in 2024 is we don't know what paganism is. Like, that's not like a big, people don't walk around and go, oh, you're a pagan. And people who identify as a pagan typically are people that are trying to be very countercultural and dive into the occult or just be different for the sake of being different. But the worship of idols is a hallmark of pagan society, of pagan ritual. It is this idea that you are worshiping something. Every time in scripture where where God is referring to pagans, he's talking about idol worship, worshiping something in front of you that you can see and touch, and it's tangible, that you feel like you can control, instead of this omnipotent, omniscient, God is everywhere, but I can't see him God. I mean, isn't that what the Romans laughed at the Jewish people about when they finally got into in AD 70, when they finally got into the temple, into the Holy of Holies, and they were like, but where's your God, idol? We don't see your God. Because in God's dwelling place, the temple, he's not, you can't see him. He's not there. There's no idol to worship. And what occurred to me in thinking about this book, The Last Apocalypse, is that while in large part Europe becomes Christianized, because that's what's going on, Reston uses vivid storytelling to bring key figures and places to life, focusing on influential leaders and warriors and religious figures whose ambitions and conflicts shaped the continent. And this narrative weaves together the accounts of the Vikings' brutal raids and subsequent Christianization, and the rise of the Capetian dynasty in France, and the struggles of the English against Norse invasions. Additionally, he explores the spiritual power of the Catholic Church and the influence of the Cluny Abbey's monastic reform movement, which fostered a religious awakening that helps to define the political and moral framework of medieval Europe. So what we have in this transition of about 50 years before and after AD 1000 is not so much this apocalypse, or maybe that's what it is, this uncover and revealing, right? Is that they traded one idol for another. And so while we're waiting for Jesus to return, I'm wondering if the Christianization of Europe didn't really happen because they didn't really follow Jesus. They traded a different set of idols. One of the book's central themes is the transformation of pagan and warrior cultures into a more unified Christendom. But we've since learned that Christendom isn't Christianity, and it isn't practicing the way. The Christendom, where disparate tribes and kingdoms began to coalesce under the banner of Christianity, they traded their idols. And Reston highlights how fear of the world's end catalyzed this unification, as rulers and commoners alike sought salvation and stability in an era rife with uncertainty. And so when there's uncertainty, people go to their idols. There's so many different stories in the Old Testament where we see that happen. where people revert back to their idols as their backup plan because we can't see God. We don't understand God, the mystery. Paul warns about it. Even the false teachers that are referenced in the New Testament letters, Jesus talks about the fruit and the people who are building houses on sand versus people building on solid rock, people living their lives in uncertainty. And even now, one of the things that has been bandied about in the past week since the election, and I don't know when you're going to listen to this, so I try to keep these episodes as evergreen as possible, but they've been talking about people who are low information. Everybody comes out and votes in a presidential election. And so you end up with people who are not necessarily following politics, who are not necessarily really engaged in what's going on, where all of, where the ramifications of their choices or full understanding of the options. Whereas people who show up in the alternate years, where it's mostly Congress and governors being elected, those are the folks that are really engaged, they're really paying attention. And so the vote swings a different direction. And so Reston highlights how this fear of the world's end catalyzes unification because of this uncertainty. They're looking for salvation and stability. But when you watch the series, the Viking series like Valhalla, and you have that one guy, I think his name was Olaf, who's going around killing people. It's like, follow Jesus or die. And that's not exactly what Jesus said do. And that's what I call the low information Christian, right? They didn't have the information. So through the last apocalypse, Reston sheds light on an often overlooked period, presenting the first millennium as a pivotal era that sowed seeds for the European identities and institutions that followed. But it's not that they were overtly Christ-like. I mean, what follows is Spain kicking the Moors out violently. What follows is the Spanish Inquisition that kicked all the Jewish people and the Muslims out violently. The doctrine of discovery shows up after this, that Europe is the identity. So these identities and institutions that follow, are they the unveiling? And his narrative underscores the impact of this millennial anxiety on European social order. Not millennial in the sense of generations like now. They're talking about it was 1000, the year 1000. And so we're going with this year 1000, and then we hit year 2000. And here we are 25 years later, asking a lot of the same questions, like, what did we miss? What changed? And if we go back and look at the last 25 years, historically, politically, economically, we can see what has changed. And so the narrative of the last apocalypse, and Reston, I looked him up last night online. He just passed away like last year, 2023. His narrative, and he goes on to write about 9/11 and other things that have happened, and he writes about Nixon and stuff. Like he's a political historical writer. He's not a theologian. He's just he's researching and looking at what's going on and going, or what happened, and making an assessment. But he says, he underscores the impact of millennial anxiety on European social order, cultural expression, and political consolidation, making it both a gripping historical study, because yes, it is, and an exploration of the human psyche's response to perceived existential threats. To perceived existential threats. The apocalypse is the unveiling, and the events described in Revelation take place in a moment where there is an apocalyptic moment, an unveiling moment. And the author uses symbolic imagery and numbers not to confuse, but to communicate. One of the things in Scott McKnight's book, and oh gosh, I don't have it in my notes to discuss today, but I'm really looking forward to having this conversation in Bible study, is how the Negro spiritual compares to Revelation, to the spirituals of sorts in Revelation, because there's communication to these 7 specific church communities, but there's this hope, there's this faithfulness, there's this comfort, but there's also this idea of communication when I can't communicate because what I am uncovering or revealing will get me killed. Because remember, John is sitting on an island, effectively on house arrest. So today's episode is, I want to talk about this group project of discipleship. I feel like what Reston shows us in the last apocalypse, what we saw in the last time that people thought the world was going to end or were concerned about the spread of Christianity, I feel like they missed the point. I mean, I talk about this in, I have a whole Bible study called Galatians, an adventure in missing the point, which is available. You can check out the Patreon page or my website at ericasantiago.com for details on that if you want to walk through Galatians with me. But the adventure of missing the point, we see this throughout the New Testament. Jesus even talks about it, the wolf in sheep's clothing. But it's a group project. Jesus doesn't try to go at it alone. As soon as he starts his ministry, he's getting people to participate. So in her recent book, Discipleship as Holy Collaboration by Yolanda Solomon, that came out this year, she talks about discipleship as a group project. And I'm almost done reading the book. I think I have like 1, maybe 2 chapters left to go. But in her chapter on the beauty of discipleship, she shared a personal perspective that, and I quote, "These days I'm tempted to lose my love." It's on page 116. And she says, "These days I'm tempted to lose my love." And this reminded me of the church at Ephesus. This is the letter that I often hold up as Discipleship 101 in Paul's remix of the 10 Commandments. This is the church that he wrote about submission and the mystery of the gospel and reconciliation. This is the letter that gets quoted about putting on the full armor and spiritual warfare. But as I'm preparing to teach on the book of Revelation later today, this is also the church that was admonished for losing their first love. And love is replaced with rules and regulations, replaced with duty and the lack of compassion. Yolanda Solomon references in this chapter a number of Bible verses, and I want to pause a second here, and I'm gonna grab my Bible, and I want to read each of these because it was a lot for 2 pages, but I want to make sure that you hear this. So just a second here. Okay, I'm back, and this is why I wanted to open up my Bible and actually read, because context is key. In fact, when I opened it up, I have a sheet of paper in there with a handwritten note to self: exegetical checklist. Number 1, translation. Number 2, historical and cultural context. Number 3, word studies. Number 4, grammar. Number 5, interpretive problems. Number 6, outlining. Number 7, theology. Number 8, application. I heard it yesterday. I was watching a conference that was recently held here in Atlanta on YouTube last night. And they posted videos of the conference, which I was very grateful for, because I didn't hear about the conference until it was literally too late to register and already going on. So I was glad to be able to be a fly on the wall to hear what was said. And the target audience wasn't me. It was Gen Z folks. And so as an older person now, I'm trying to adjust to that new identity in my life that I am older. And I praise God for that, because there's some folks that didn't make it. Amen. Discipleship as a group project, they encouraged that. But the other thing that I thought was interesting that they shared at this conference, one of the speakers pointed out that the Bible is not about us as individuals. So notice on my exegetical checklist, number 8 is application. In other words, how do I apply this to my life? Because discipleship is a group project, and that's often a foreign concept in the way a lot of our churches operate today. It's a group project because it's a community project. It is a we are all in this together project. Holy collaboration, as Yolanda Solomon puts in the title of her book, Holy Collaboration. And what we miss, I think, is in our American or Western context of individualism. I mean, you think about it. You have in the last apocalypse that we just talked about, you have Europe kind of formulating its Christendom identity. But the people that were in charge were still very far removed from the average person. And so because of the changes that eventually come up where the Europeans, quote unquote, discover the new world, a lot of those people who left Europe that came here came for very individual reasons. They wanted gold. They wanted prosperity. They wanted the almighty dollar. And some pundits would say that that was the result of the election. It was the economy. And if it was the economy, then these are the same. This is the heritage of the people who left Europe 500 years after this apocalypse, this unveiling, this creation of this new European Christian identity that's not based on Christ or becoming Christ-like. These are the folks that showed up on these shores and grabbed my ancestors on their way here. But I digress. Proverbs 3. She quotes Proverbs 3, verse 3, but I want to read a little bit more than that. So Proverbs 3, starting at verse 1, my child, never forget the things I have taught you. Store my commands in your heart. If you do this, you will live many years, and your life will be satisfying. Verse 3, never let loyalty and kindness leave you. Tie them around your neck as a reminder. Write them deep within your heart. Verse 4, then you will find favor with both God and people, and you will earn a good reputation. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. Don't be impressed with your own wisdom. Instead, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Then you will have healing for your body and strength for your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the best part of everything you produce. Then he will fill your barns with grain, and your vats will overflow with good wine. My child, don't reject the Lord's discipline, and don't be upset when he corrects you. For the Lord corrects those he loves, just as a father corrects a child in whom he delights. Joyful is the person who finds wisdom, the one who gains understanding, for wisdom is more profitable than silver, and her wages are better than gold. Wisdom is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. She offers you long life in her right hand, and riches and honor in her left. She will guide you down delightful paths. All her ways are satisfying. Wisdom is a tree of life to those who embrace her. Happy are those who hold her tightly. By wisdom the Lord founded the earth. By understanding he created the heavens. By his knowledge the deep fountains of the earth burst forth, and the dew settles beneath the night sky. My child, don't lose sight of common sense and discernment. Hang on to them, for they will refresh your soul. They are like jewels on a necklace. They keep you safe on your way, and your feet will not stumble. You can go to bed without fear. You will lie down and sleep soundly. You need not be afraid of sudden disaster or the destruction that comes upon the wicked, for the Lord is your security. He will keep your foot from being caught in a trap. Do not withhold good from those who deserve it when it's in your power to help them. If you can help your neighbor now, don't say, come back tomorrow and I'll help you. Don't plot harm against your neighbor, for those who live nearby trust you. Don't pick a fight without reason when no one has done you harm. Don't envy violent people or copy their ways. Such wicked people are detestable to the Lord. but he offers his friendship to the godly. The Lord curses the house of the wicked, but he blesses the home of the upright. The Lord mocks the mockers, but is gracious to the humble. The wise inherit honor, but fools are put to shame. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his holy word. Friends, that was Proverbs chapter 3. Proverbs is a wisdom book. Proverbs is in the Old Testament. Wisdom is identified and personified in the Old Testament in the female gender. And wisdom is something that I think was missing in the 1000 AD era, and probably now too. We call it low information today, which is a polite way of saying ignorant, because ignorant is offensive. But in the time of the last apocalypse, Europe at the year 1000 AD, you had the blind leading the blind because you had a largely illiterate populace transitioning from a pagan lifestyle where they worshiped idols. And if you watch Valhalla on Netflix, you will see that the way the writers personify the Vikings in the way it's written, you kind of end up rooting. I was rooting for the Vikings. Like, seriously, I was rooting for the Viking priestess against the Christians, because the Christians were so doggone not Christ-like. And Proverbs may not have been accessible to the people in that time. It's accessible for us now. Now, she's got several other verses, and I want to run through some more of those. But that was right there, I think, when we think of discipleship as a collaborative group project, at some point, we have to ask, who's in our group? I have 4 kids. 2 of them are adults, 2 almost adults. One, well, maybe the last one, maybe not so much close to an adult. But that being said, one of the things that irks and has irked over the years, each one of them, when they've been in school, and we homeschooled a lot, but we also did the public school thing too, is whenever they have to participate in a group project, I get nothing but complaints and annoyed teenagers because so-and-so wasn't participating. They missed the Zoom. They didn't call. They didn't stay after school like we agreed. And I was sitting in the library for 25 minutes and nobody showed up. I feel like that is the status of the church today. Our group project. We've been so bent on getting people converted and numbers and butts and seats that we literally have not discipled people. We have not engaged in the group project. So it doesn't matter what our silos of identity are, and it doesn't matter if we have faith as an individual, if we're not doing what Jesus actually commanded us to do, which was to love God, yes, but show that we love God by how we love others. And that was one of the things that really hit me in the verse where it said, verse 29 in chapter 3 here of Proverbs, don't plot harm against your neighbor, for those who live nearby trust you. Imagine the context that this was written in ancient Israel, where there were no cars, and the people who live near you, your neighbor, they implicitly trust you and believe that you have what's best for them in mind, because that's what God commanded in the 10 Commandments, and Paul reiterates in the remix in Ephesians, and Jesus reiterates with his commands in John 13. All right. Before I move on, let me jump to Colossians chapter 3, because that's what else she talks about in this chapter. So let's see, Colossians 3, Romans, Corinthians, Galatians. So I have this really cool Bible that my husband gave me. And by the way, I was reading from the New Living Translation. I have this Bible. It's a journal Bible. So there's the column, it's 2 columns split on the page. And the first column is the text in New Living Translation. And the second column on the right is where I can write notes, which I like to do. And my goal is to do enough of these Bibles, to do 4 of these Bibles so I can pass them on to my kids. But yeah, seeing as how I do a lot of things online, this one I need to put more notes in so I can at least get one done. Okay, Colossians 3, verse 14 is the other one she references on this page. Above all, clothe yourselves with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony. And it goes on, and let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts, for as members of one body you are called to live in peace and always be thankful. Here's the thing. When I think about how Europe was converted to Christianity, it wasn't peaceful. Yeah, there may have been people here and there who had a clue. Yes. But I feel like a lot of the ways that we convert people, and this is why I feel so strongly about talking about Revelation right now in this moment, this societal moment that we have in the churches, and realizing that Revelation is really a study on how to be a dissident disciple in a context where Babylon is in charge. Because we don't know how to do that. We haven't been taught that. We haven't been discipled to do that. We haven't been discipled to put peace and love ahead of the violent conversion, to think the way I think. Yes, we want everybody to follow Jesus, but Jesus did not tell us to do it with the sword. In fact, when Peter pulls his sword out and knocks the guy's ear, cuts the guy's ear off, Jesus heals it right away and he fusses at Peter like, dude, chill. So Colossians 3 and this group project that we have going on, this holy collaboration, makes sense, right? Especially to our exegetical checklist. And I haven't really had to do a lot of that because one of the things that I love about reading books, especially books by scholars like Yolanda Solomon, she is both a scholar and a practitioner. She is practicing discipleship, which is why she wrote this excellent book on it. And if you are leading disciples, if you are making disciples, if you're teaching discipleship, I recommend this book. But I also recommend, because number 2 is historical and cultural context, that we understand the history, that we get an idea. And maybe, Netflix is not your jam because there's a whole bunch of other stuff that comes with watching that stuff on Netflix. It requires fast forwarding through. But yeah, it's a group project. And Revelation, the church at Ephesus, they were admonished for losing their first love because they replaced it with harsh rules and regulations. They replaced it with duty and lack of compassion. If I learned nothing else from watching The Crown, is that duty makes for a miserable life. If you're just doing things not because you want to do them, because there's love, and like Paul writes, God loves a cheerful giver. We say that at the offering time at church, that we're not giving under compulsion, but it feels like the way that we have mistaught or misinterpreted or created rapture anxiety. I have a whole episode just on rapture anxiety. The way that we've done that, we've created an environment where people are being bullied into following Jesus. And I just don't see that in the text. That was what we were supposed to be doing. It is just not what I see. So I'm going to stop here because we're at 40 minutes and you're probably done with your run, your workout, or your drive to work, unless you're in Atlanta, and you probably will have to listen to another episode before you get there. But yeah, we're going to stop here. And when I come back, I'm going to pick up where I left off. And we're going to read Matthew 17 and 2 Corinthians and Psalms and Galatians. And I mean, all of this was just in 2 pages. And this discussion of holy collaboration, I want us to get to talking about Revelation, because I am super excited about teaching on it, but I can't ramble on in a 1.5 hour, 90-minute context and allow for Q&A and share all the things that I'm coming up with here and that I'm seeing in the text, that I am finding, that I'm learning, that I'm discerning. And this talking with you guys, I really appreciate, because it is helping me kind of coalesce my thoughts for later on. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for joining me today on No More Silos. I pray and hope that everything that we talk about here is a blessing to you. And if it is, please share these episodes with your friends, with your loved ones, with your coworkers and colleagues who are interested in learning more about their faith. And please leave a comment, a star, a heart, a happy face, whatever it is that your podcast application allows, but let people know that you're listening, so that more people will find this in the thousands, tens of thousands of podcasts that are out there. So I really appreciate it. Follow me on Instagram at Cultural Christianity, and check us out on Patreon at No More Silos Podcast. I am Erica, and I am very grateful and thankful for you as a listener to No More Silos. Have a great rest of your day.